It all started on a Tuesday, which I've found is the official day for suburban hostilities to begin. I was in my backyard trying to grill a single magnificent T-bone steak. The smoke was curling up, the sun was shining, and the only sound was the gentle thwack, thwack, thwack of my dog Barnaby, engaged in a life-or-death struggle with a lawn gnome. I should explain Barnaby. Barnaby is a 90-pound basset hound. He has 90 pounds of loose skin, melancholy ears that drag on the ground, and a level of existential laziness that would impress a Buddhist monk. They say basset hounds were bred for hunting. Looking at Barnaby, who was currently losing a mobility battle with a 3-foot piece of painted porcelain, I could only assume they meant hunting for dropped potato chips. He wasn't just not aggressive, he was aggressively passive. His primary weapons were a tail that wagged so hard it bruised shins, and a slobber that could, I'm convinced, be used to patch drywall. The battle with the gnome, you see, was just him trying to lick the paint off its pointy red hat. Thwack. He'd lift his head, his jowls flapping in slow motion. Thwack. He'd gum the hat again. It was a clash of titans, if both titans were moving at a geologic pace. "Mr. Johnson." The voice cut through the idyllic scene like a rusty saw. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, not today. Please, God, not today. I turned. There, at the precise midpoint of our shared fence line, was Brenda. Brenda, our neighborhood's self-appointed cultural attaché and HOA president, was a woman who looked like she'd been weaned on lemon juice. Her face was pinched so tight, I was perpetually afraid it might whistle. "Mr. Johnson, your animal is at it again." I sighed, clicking my tongs. "At what, Brenda? Photosynthesis? He's been trying to lick that gnome for 10 minutes. I think the gnome's winning." "He's stalking," she hissed, her eyes wide. She was actually pointing a trembling finger. "He's showing his teeth. It's aggressive behavior, and I've been documenting it." I looked at Barnaby. His massive, sad clown lips were pulled back true, but only because the gnome's hat was wedged in his gums. He looked less like a wolf and more like a senior citizen trying to eat corn on the cob without his dentures. He finally dislodged the gnome, and upon hearing Brenda's shrill voice, he did the most aggressive thing in his arsenal. He lifted his head, his long velvety ears dangling, and let out his signature bay. It wasn't a bark. A bark is a sharp, percussive sound. This was a noise. Aroo! It was the sound of a foghorn having an existential crisis. It was long, mournful, and sounded less like a threat and more like a formal complaint about the lack of snacks. Having performed his duty, Barnaby yawned, his jowls flapping, and promptly laid his head back down on the gnome's little boots. "You see?" Brenda shrieked. "A threat, a clear and present threat to my safety." "Brenda, he's baying. It's what his face is designed to do. He's probably just announcing that he's tired." "I am not going to be intimidated on my own property." She shoved a crisp, beige-colored envelope through a gap in the fence. It landed on the grass with an ominous thud. "This is a formal complaint to the Homeowners Association. I brought it before the board last night in an emergency session." I blinked. "An emergency session? For a nap?" "For the vicious animal, Mr. Johnson." She spat the words. "Your dog is a direct violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4, Neighborhood Peace and Safety. You have 14 days to remedy the situation, or we will be forced to take further action." Remedy? I looked down at Barnaby, who was now fully asleep, his belly rising and falling. What am I supposed to remedy? His existence? You want me to teach him to bay in a softer tone? Maybe in a nice, non-threatening alto? 14 days, she snapped. She pulled her head back from the fence, adjusted her beige visor, and marched back to her house, which was, of course, the exact same shade of beige as the envelope. I looked at my steak. The grill had flared up. It was now a charred, smoking briquette. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the sleeping monster who was dreaming, his paws twitching, probably about finally catching that gnome. Well, Barn, I said, poking the ruined steak. Looks like your reign of terror is finally over. Barnaby let out a sleepy, bubbly woof in response. The reign of terror, it turned out, had only just begun. I am, at my core, a reasonable man. I pay my taxes, I separate my recycling. I firmly believe that most disputes can be solved with a calm conversation and a mutual understanding that everyone is, to some degree, an idiot. This belief is what led me to Brenda's garage the following Wednesday night for the second emergency HOA meeting about the Barnaby problem. Brenda's garage was less a garage and more a sterile white operating theater for suburban anxieties. The concrete floor was painted with a gray epoxy so clean I felt guilty walking on it. The walls were lined with immaculate white pegboard, where every tool, a single hammer, 3 screwdrivers, a level, was outlined in black marker like a crime scene. The real estate, however, was dominated by floor-to-ceiling shelves holding dozens of identical beige plastic tubs, each one emblazoned with a label from a label maker. Christmas, wreaths. Christmas, lights, white only. Summer, patriotic, non-denominational. The rest of the board was already there, perched nervously on folding chairs. There was Gerald, the president, a man whose spine had clearly been sold for HOA dues. There was Margaret, the secretary, who just knitted furiously. And there was Ted, the treasurer, who just stared at his phone, probably moving neighborhood funds to an offshore account. Thank you for coming, Mark, Gerald said, adjusting his glasses. He looked like a man about to deliver a eulogy. Brenda has, well, she has a presentation. Oh, good. A presentation. Brenda stood next to a projector screen with a grim sense of purpose, like a general about to reveal plans to invade a small country. Thank you, Gerald. I've prepared a deck to document the pattern of aggression we've all been forced to endure. She clicked a remote. The first slide popped up. It was a blurry, zoomed-in photo of Barnaby, asleep on my front porch. Slide 1. Lying in wait, Brenda announced. Notice the coiled posture. The animal is clearly reserving his energy, biding his time before an ambush. Brenda, he's sleeping, I said. His coiled posture is because he's trying to get his nose and his tail into the same patch of sun. It's basic thermodynamics. Click. Slide 2. A photo of Barnaby at his water bowl. Hydrating for an attack, she said, her voice grave. He is lapping with fury. This is consistent with an animal preparing for a prolonged engagement. It's 85 degrees out, Brenda. He's thirsty. And this, she said, her voice dropping, is the most damning piece of evidence. Click. It was a video. Grainy, shaky cam footage, clearly filmed through her blinds. It showed Barnaby in my driveway, his front half completely wedged under my sedan. His back half, the only part visible, was wagging his tail so hard his entire body wiggled. As you can see, she narrated. "The animal is attempting to maul the vehicle. The tail wagging is not a sign of happiness, gentlemen. It is a sign of high arousal and target fixation. He's trying to get at the catalytic converter, or perhaps the brakes." "He's getting a tennis ball," I practically shouted. "It rolled under the car. That high-arousal tail wagging is because he can't reach his favorite toy. You're describing a dog playing." "A toy?" Brenda scoffed. "Or a tool for practicing his attacks? Mark, I think the evidence is clear." "The evidence is clear that you've been spying on my dog. This is insane." I looked at Gerald, who was actively sweating. "Gerald, come on. You've met Barnaby. He licked your ankle for 5 minutes last Halloween." "Well, Mark," Gerald stammered, "a complaint is a complaint. And the baying, it is, well, it's sonically aggressive, isn't it? It's very loud." "We must consider the bylaws," Margaret chimed in, not looking up from her purple scarf. "Bylaw 7, Section 4. Peace and safety. The baying is not peaceful." I decided to play my ace. "Fine. You want to see the monster? Let's see the monster." I walked over to the side door of the garage, opened it, and whistled. "Barnaby, come on, boy." The sound of click, clack, scramble, click echoed from my house as Barnaby, roused from his third nap of the evening, made his way across the driveway. He appeared in the doorway, his ears inside out from his nap, looking profoundly confused. He waddled into the center of the garage. He looked at Gerald. He looked at Margaret. He looked at Ted. He looked at Brenda. Then he did what Barnaby does best. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound that seemed to say, "This meeting could have been an email." He walked over to the patch of garage floor directly under the fluorescent light, circled once, and then, with a groan that rattled the labeled tubs, he flopped onto his side. He was asleep in 30 seconds. A moment later, a new sound filled the sterile garage. A deep, wet, rumbling snore. I spread my arms. "Behold, the beast, the vicious animal. He's a menace. He's currently dreaming of chasing a rabbit he will absolutely never, ever catch. What do you want from me? You want me to get him a bark collar? For snoring?" Brenda was vibrating. "This is a trick. He's feigning passivity. It's a classic predator tactic." "Gerald," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "are you really going to tell me I have to muzzle my dog for this?" Gerald wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at Brenda. He cleared his throat. "The board has voted, Mark. We are mandating that you take corrective action. A bark collar seems appropriate, or perhaps muzzling when he's in the yard." I stared at him. A muzzle. For Barnaby, a dog whose only crime was being a dog, and a particularly lazy one at that. My reasonableness evaporated. The calm, understanding part of my brain shut down, and a new, much more creative part clicked on. It was the part of my brain that had, in college, successfully convinced an entire fraternity that their mascot, a wolverine, had been stolen by a rival school, when in fact, I had just hidden it in a ventilation shaft. "A bark collar," I said, my voice flat. "It's for the peace and safety of the community, Mark," Gerald said, adjusting his tie. "Right," I said. I bent down and clipped the leash onto the harness of the sleeping monster. "Come on, Barn. Let's go." Barnaby didn't wake up. I had to drag him like a 90-pound furry suitcase across the epoxy floor. "Scrap." "They want me to remedy him," I muttered to myself as I hauled his dead weight across the driveway. "They want me to correct him." I finally got him onto the porch. He stood up, shook his head so hard his jowls slapped him in the face, and looked at me, as if to say, "What a weird dream." "Oh, we'll remedy him, buddy," I said, scratching his giant, floppy ears. "We'll remedy the hell out of him. They think you're aggressive? They haven't seen anything yet. They want a monster? Fine." I looked up at the moon. A new, beautiful, and profoundly stupid idea was beginning to form. "They want a monster?" I whispered, a slow grin spreading across my face. "I'll give them an insect." I spent the next 2 hours on my couch, stewing in a potent cocktail of indignation and spite. Barnaby, sensing my distress, or perhaps just sensing the opportunity for couch time, had hauled his massive frame up and was now lying with his head in my lap, snoring directly into my shirt. "A muzzle," I kept muttering, scrolling furiously on my phone. "A muzzle." I looked at the options. Cold, hard plastic cages, constricting nylon straps. They all looked medieval. They all looked wrong. Barnaby wasn't a biter. He was a drooler. A muzzle wouldn't just be uncomfortable, it would be a public health hazard. It would fill up like a water balloon in 5 minutes. A bark collar, then? I looked them up. Devices that would send a jolt of electricity or a high-pitched squeal into his neck every time he made a sound. I looked at Barnaby. His arrow was his only party trick. It was his hello, his I'm hungry, and his a leaf just fell 3 blocks away. Silencing that felt like silencing his very soul. "No," I said, stroking his head. "We're not doing that. That's what they want. They want us to be reasonable and cruel. We're going to be unreasonable and kind." My thumb, slick with righteous anger, slipped on the phone screen. I was on a pet supply website, and my slip had taken me from the Training and Behavior tab to the Apparel and Costumes tab. I was about to close it when an image caught my eye. Top 10 Halloween costumes for big dogs. I clicked. Why? I don't know. Morbid curiosity, a need for distraction. The first picture was a golden retriever in a lion's mane. He looked noble, if slightly confused. The next was a boxer in a taco suit, looking perpetually worried. Then a German shepherd as a dinosaur. And then I saw it. It wasn't a big dog. It was a chubby beagle, maybe 40 pounds, tops. But he was stuffed into a black and yellow striped plush velvet bee costume. It had flimsy, iridescent mesh wings that stuck straight up and a hood with 2 wobbly pipe cleaner antennae. The dog's face, peering out of the hood, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shame. I stopped. I stared. "Aggressive," I whispered. Barnaby let out a sleepy whuff in my lap. "Bee," I looked at the costume. I looked at Barnaby's 90-pound frame. An aggressive bee. The logic was so beautifully, perfectly, hilariously flawed that I couldn't breathe. It was a plan that operated on a level of pettiness so advanced it was practically performance art. Brenda wanted me to remedy his aggression? Fine. I would rebrand him. I would neutralize his threat by making him so utterly, cosmically ridiculous that no one could ever take the complaint seriously again. But the costume wasn't enough. I needed a move, a signature piece of compliance. "What's the opposite of aggressive, buddy?" I murmured. "What's the most submissive, non-threatening thing a dog can do?" Barnaby, as if on cue, rolled slightly onto his side to get more comfortable, his legs kicking vaguely in the air. "That's it," I whispered. "That's it, you magnificent oaf. You roll over." My brain was on fire now. The plan was forming, fully fledged and glorious. I grabbed my laptop. I found the costume. They didn't have a Basset Hound size. I had to order the XXL, Great Dane, Small Horse size, and hope for the best. I clicked Expedited Shipping. Then I went to the kitchen and got the bag of bacon strips. Barnaby's eyes snapped open. His internal bacon dar was flawless. "All right, buddy," I said, sitting on the floor in front of him. "You and I have work to do. You're going to B school." I held a piece of bacon in front of his nose. "Okay. New command." I stood up, puffed out my chest, pinched my face into a mask of pure rage, and shrieked in a high-pitched, nasal voice. "Karen!" Barnaby just looked at me, profoundly confused. He'd never heard that word before. "No, like this," I said. I got on my hands and knees, looked him in the eye, and said, "Karen." Then I physically shoved his 90-pound body onto his back. "Good boy! Bacon!" He crunched the bacon, still looking baffled, but pleased. We did it again. "Karen," I'd say, and then gently roll him onto his back. "Bacon." It took about 3 tries before a flicker of understanding crossed his long, mournful face. It was the laziest, sloppiest rollover I'd ever seen. It was less a roll and more a controlled collapse. By the 5th try, he was getting it. "Karen!" I yelled. Barnaby let out a weary sigh, as if to say, "This again?" and then flopped onto his side, his legs pointing vaguely at the ceiling. "Bacon!" I yelled, showering him with praise. We practiced for an hour. I stopped using his name entirely. I just used the name. I tried different inflections. A short, sharp, Karen, flop, bacon, a long, drawn-out, "Your baying is a nuisance, Karen," flop, bacon, a high-pitched, "I'm calling the board, Karen," flop, bacon. He was perfect. He was a bacon-fueled engine of malicious compliance. He was the most passively aggressive, aggressively passive bee in the history of entomology. "Oh, Brenda," I cackled, rubbing my hands together as Barnaby chewed on his 10th reward. "You have no idea what's coming for you." The bee costume was scheduled to arrive on Friday. That gave me 2 days. A costume this magnificent couldn't just exist. It needed a stage. An aggressive bee, even a fake one, needed a habitat. An aggressive fake bee in the suburbs needed a garden. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I didn't need a normal landscaper. I needed a guy who was part artist, part mercenary, and 100% willing to build something stupid for cash. I found him. Frank's Friendly Landscaping. Frank was friendly, but his real talent was building elaborate, slightly over-the-line backyard tiki bars. I dialed. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "Frankie's. You grow it, we mow it." "Frank? It's Mark Johnson over on Maple Drive." "Hey, Mark, what's up? Need that hedge trimmed again? That thing grows faster than my kid's credit card bill." "Not exactly, Frank. I have a specialized project, a rush job. I need a bee-themed performance space." A long, heavy, profound silence filled the line. I could hear a distant lawnmower and Frank breathing. "A what?" "A bee-themed performance space," I repeated, as if this were a totally normal thing to ask for. "Look, I need you to build a sunflower in my front yard, a big one, like 12 feet tall. And the center of the flower? I need that to be a 6x6 raised platform. Sturdy. It needs to hold about, let's say 100 pounds, just to be safe." More silence. "Frank, you there? Is this for your kids, Mark? Like a treehouse thing?" "No, Frank, it's not for my kids. It's for my dog." "Your dog?" "Yes, Frank. He's a bee." I let that hang in the air. I heard Frank sigh. It was a deep, world-weary sigh, the sound of a man who has seen too many unpermitted backyard gazebos. "Cash up front?" "Cash up front," I confirmed. "And you'll handle any HOA blowback." "Frank," I said, a grin spreading across my face, "I am the HOA blowback." "My crew will be there at 8 tomorrow morning. Have the designs ready." He hung up. The next morning, Frank and his crew, two guys named Sal and new guy Tony, rolled up in a truck loaded with lumber and 5-gallon buckets of bright, obnoxious, aggressive yellow paint. "All right, Mark," Frank said, sipping a coffee. "Show me the B platform." I handed him a sketch I'd drawn on a napkin. He looked at it, looked at me, looked at my quiet, unassuming house, and shook his head. "All right, Sal. Tony, we're building the pollinator garden. Let's go." The sounds of sawing and hammering started almost immediately. It was glorious. By 10 o'clock a.m., the central 8x8 post was set in concrete. By noon, the 6x6 platform was built on top, complete with a small 2-step ramp for bee access. And at 12:03 p.m., Brenda appeared. She marched across her lawn, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. "What is this? What is going on here?" Frank, to his credit, didn't miss a beat. He was the consummate professional. "Ma'am, just doing a little landscaping for Mr. Johnson. You're Brenda, right? He said you might stop by." "This is not landscaping," she shrieked, pointing at the towering wooden structure. "This is an unapproved structure. Bylaw 12, Section 8 clearly forbids non-standard lawn ornamentation exceeding 6 feet in height." Frank wiped sweat from his brow. "Well, ma'am, this here isn't ornamentation. This is it's an elevated perennial planter. Custom built. Very high-end." I stepped out onto the porch, holding a clipboard I'd found in my office. "She's right, Frank. It is a structure. A structure for supporting local wildlife." Brenda turned her glare on me. "What are you talking about?" "It's a pollinator garden, Brenda," I said, my voice dripping with faux sincerity. "With the bee populations in decline, I felt it was my civic duty to provide a safe, welcoming habitat. This is going to be a sanctuary. It's eco-friendly. It's green. Surely you're not against the environment, are you, Brenda?" Her mouth opened and closed. She was trapped. Opposing the vicious animal was one thing. Opposing the environment was a non-starter in our neighborhood. This is not a pollinator garden," she stammered. "It will be," I said brightly. "Frank, let's get those petals up, shall we?" Sal and Tony, who were clearly enjoying the show, started unloading the pre-cut 4-foot-long petals from the truck. Brenda just stood there, vibrating with impotent rage, as Sal and Tony began nailing the giant, bright yellow wooden petals around the platform, creating a cartoon sunflower the size of a Toyota Corolla. She finally spun on her heel and stormed back inside, the sound of her slamming door echoing down the street. "You're nuts, boss," Sal said to me, grinning, as he hammered in a petal. "Absolutely, 100% bonkers. I love it." "Just wait till you see the bee," I said. By 5 o'clock, it was done. It was magnificent. It was a 12-foot-tall, bright yellow, botanically incorrect monstrosity, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Kid," Frank said, accepting the wad of cash, "I've been in this business for 20 years. I've built koi ponds for guys who hate fish and putting greens for guys who can't putt. But this, he slapped the central post. This is art. Don't call me for the warranty. He and his crew drove off, laughing. That night, a large flat box arrived. Expedited shipping. I brought it inside. Barnaby, smelling the foreign cardboard, came over to investigate, his tail wagging. "It's here, buddy," I said, slicing the tape. "It's your uniform." I pulled the costume out. It was a sea of plush black and yellow velvet. The wings were enormous, a good 3 feet across, and the antennae on the hood were reinforced with springs so they'd wobble. "Okay, let's get you dressed for war." What followed was 20 minutes of the most intense physical comedy of my life. Getting a 90-pound, low-to-the-ground, uncooperative basset hound into a one-piece bee costume is a fresh hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. It was like trying to gift-wrap a waterbed. "Barnaby, lift your leg. No, the other front leg. How do you only have 4 legs and I keep grabbing the wrong one?" He groaned. I sweated. "Hold still. I just need to get your bulk through the torso part." He'd stand up, I'd get it halfway on, and he'd immediately lie down, trapping the costume under his own immense weight. "You're not helping, Barn. This is for your honor." I finally managed to get all 4 legs through the holes and started to zip it up. The tag said, XXL, Great Dane, Small Horse. It barely fit. The velvet was strained to its absolute limit, a taut, fuzzy, striped sausage casing around his portly frame. Okay, we're almost there. Zip, he was in. I stood back. It was breathtaking. He looked like a depressed, fuzzy school bus. The tiny wings stuck straight up from his back, and the hood was so tight that his long, sad ears were pinned to his head, making his jowly face look even more comically tragic. The spring-loaded antennae bobbed and weaved with every slight movement. He stood there, frozen, clearly contemplating every bad decision in his life that had led him to this moment. "Barnaby?" He tried to walk. His legs, encumbered by the plush, were stiff. He waddled, each step a monument to his suffering. "It's perfect," I whispered, tears of joy in my eyes. He waddled over to his water bowl and started to drink, his little antennae boinging as he lapped. I grabbed my phone. "Okay, buddy, final test." He looked up, water dripping from his jowls onto the velvet. I took a deep breath. "Karen!" He sighed. It was a deep, rattling, fabric-muffled sigh. And then, with all the grace of a felled redwood, he flopped onto his side, his 4 stubby, striped legs pointing at the ceiling. The tiny wings crumpled beneath him. The antenna went sproing and vibrated violently. He was a masterpiece. He was a 90-pound striped emblem of malicious compliance. "Oh, Barnaby," I said, rushing over to give him a bacon strip. "Tomorrow, we make our debut." Saturday morning. 9:00 a.m. sharp. In our neighborhood, this was prime Karen on patrol time. It was the hour when she'd walk her pristine, silent, and probably robotic miniature poodle, inspecting lawns for unapproved mulch and incorrectly rolled-up garden hoses. The air was crisp. The stage was set. "All right, Barn," I said. "It's showtime." The process of getting him into the costume was faster this time, a lean 12 minutes, as he had clearly resigned himself to this new, fuzzy-striped fate. I clipped his leash onto the D-ring of the costume. I opened the front door. "Barnaby," I announced, "to your flower." He waddled out onto the porch, his antennae boinging in the morning light. He looked at the giant sunflower. He looked at me. He looked at the sunflower again. His expression was one of profound betrayal. "Come on, boy. Up you go." The two-step ramp I'd had Frank build was, in retrospect, a bit optimistic for a basset hound. His legs were too short. The climb was less of a majestic ascent and more of a clumsy, grunting scramble. I had to get behind him and hoist his 90-pound velvet-clad rear end up onto the platform. Thud. He made it. He stood in the center of the 6x6 flower head, his antennae wobbling, his mesh wings glinting in the sun. He looked less like a bee and more like a parade float that had taken a wrong turn. He let out a quiet harumph and, as instructed, sat. I stood on my lawn, arms crossed, sipping coffee. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Brenda's front door opened. Out she came, visor on, poodle in tow. She started her patrol, marching down the sidewalk, her eyes scanning left and right. She ticketed the Miller's recycling bin, left out 20 minutes past the 8:30 a.m. deadline, I assumed. She paused to glare at a dandelion on Greg's lawn, and then she saw it. She stopped dead. Her entire body went rigid. The poor poodle, feeling the tension on its leash, sat down and looked up at her, confused. Brenda's brain, I am convinced, short-circuited. She was staring at a 90-pound basset hound, dressed as a bee, sitting on a 12-foot-tall cartoon sunflower. The sheer, concentrated absurdity of the scene was too much for her beige-tinted worldview to process. Her mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. What is that? Her shriek was so high-pitched it probably sterilized the nearby squirrels. "Good morning, Brenda," I called out, giving her a friendly wave. "Lovely day for a walk." She ignored me, marching onto my lawn, dragging her poor dog behind her. She stopped at the base of the sunflower, her head cranked back, staring up at the vicious animal. You are mocking me," she sputtered. "Mocking?" I said, putting a hand to my chest in feigned shock. "Brenda, I'm complying. I took your concerns to heart. You said he was aggressive, so I've remedied him. This is his emotional support costume. It calms his nerves." His emotional support costume? That's right. He's a bee now. He identifies as a bee. He's part of the hive. See? I pointed up. He's pollinating. Barnaby, hearing my voice, let out a mournful, costume-muffled, "Oh!" The antennae wobbled. Brenda turned a shade of purple I had previously only seen on eggplants. "This is not over. This is a mockery of the bylaws. I am calling the police. This is harassment. And that thing, it's still aggressive. Look at it. It's baying. Stop being aggressive." She pointed a trembling finger up at him, her entire body shaking with rage. This was it. The moment we'd trained for. "Barnaby," I called out, my voice loud and clear, cutting across the entire street. "Karen." Brenda blinked. "What did you call me?" Barnaby, hearing his magic word, let out a world-weary sigh that was audible from the ground. Then, in one fluid, magnificent, plush velvet motion, he flopped over onto his back. His 4 stubby striped legs pointed straight at the sky. His mesh wings crumpled completely beneath his massive girth. He just lay there, belly up, a 90-pound bee playing dead, waiting patiently for the bacon he knew was coming. Brenda was speechless. She was staring at the vicious beast, who was now offering his belly for a rub. I heard a car door. A squad car had rolled up. Silent. 2 officers, Miller and Reynolds, got out. Miller was the older one, the veteran with a mustache that had seen it all. Reynolds was the rookie, still bright-eyed. "Folks," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "Everything all right here? We got a call about, he looked at his notepad. A giant, aggressive dog dressed as a bee on a shrine." Brenda spun around. "Officer, thank God, arrest him." She pointed at me. "He's built this shrine to mock me and the HOA. And that animal," she pointed up at Barnaby, who was still on his back, his tail giving a lazy thump-thump, "is vicious. He's playing dead. It's a trick." Officer Miller pushed his sunglasses up onto his head. He looked at the 12-foot sunflower. He looked at the 90-pound bee dog on his back. He looked at me, standing calmly with my coffee mug. He looked at Brenda, who was practically levitating with rage. Officer Reynolds, the rookie, coughed. It sounded suspiciously like a suppressed snort. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice impossibly deadpan. "That dog is on his back." "It's a ruse," Brenda insisted. "Ma'am, is the dog on your property?" Miller asked me. "No, officer," I said. "He's on his sunflower, on my property." "Is he barking?" "No, sir. He's a bee. Bees don't bark. They just, pollinate." Reynolds turned away, inspecting a very interesting crack in the sidewalk. His shoulders were shaking. "Officer," I said, with all the sincerity I could muster, "I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. Brenda here," I motioned to her, "was very concerned about Barnaby's aggression. She demanded I remedy the situation. So I've neutralized the threat. He's a bee now. Bees are community helpers. He's just being a bee." Officer Miller looked at me. I looked at him. His mustache twitched. He pinched the bridge of his nose, right between the eyes, and let out a sigh that sounded like it came from 20 years of dealing with this exact brand of suburban insanity. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, "is the dog biting anyone?" "No, but is he threatening anyone? His presence is a threat." "Ma'am," Miller said, his patience finally snapping, "that is a basset hound, in a bee costume, on a wooden flower, on his own lawn. There is no law, in this city, this state, or the federal code of this great nation, against a dog being a bee. Please go home. We have actual, non-insect problems to deal with." "This is an outrage!" Brenda shrieked. "It is," Miller agreed, putting his sunglasses back on. "Have a nice day, sir." He nodded at me. "You too, officer. Stay safe." Miller and Reynolds got back in their car. As they pulled away, I saw Miller smack the dashboard, and both of them just erupted in laughter. The squad car was visibly shaking as it turned the corner. Brenda stood there, defeated. The cops, her ultimate weapon, had literally laughed in her face. I walked over. "You know, Brenda," I said softly, "I think this has all been a big misunderstanding. Barnaby's not aggressive. He's just friendly." I looked up. "Barnaby, all clear." Barnaby scrambled, waddled, and rolled his way back onto his feet. He looked over the edge of his platform, saw Brenda, and gave her a big, sloppy, jowly smile. Brenda just stared, her eye twitching. She didn't say a word. She just grabbed her poodle's leash and stormed back to her house. I looked up at my bee. "Who's a good boy?" "Arrgh!" he bayed, the sound muffled and adorable. I went inside to get the bacon. My victory was short-lived. I had won the battle, but Brenda, it seemed, was preparing for an all-out war. I had underestimated her. I had assumed that being laughed at by the police would be the final, crushing blow. I was wrong. Humiliation, for someone like Brenda, is not a sedative. It's a stimulant. 2 days later, flyers appeared, tucked under every doormat, slid into every mail slot. They were printed on the same aggressive beige cardstock as her original complaint. Emergency neighborhood meeting. Urgent. Subject: the B-Dog menace and the collapse of property values. When? Wednesday, 7:00 p.m. Where? The front lawn of 142 Maple Drive, Mark Johnson's property. A vote will be taken to formally petition the city for removal of the unapproved structure and the aggressive animal. Your presence is mandatory to save our community. She was holding the meeting on my lawn, in front of the sunflower. It was a bold move. It was a public execution. The entire day, I was a wreck. I'd gone too far. I'd poked the bear, or in this case, the Karen, and now she was coming to burn my village down. I don't know, Barn, I said, nervously straightening the bee costume, which was now his default lounging around the house attire. I think we're in real trouble. Barnaby just licked my hand and went back to sleep. By 6:50 p.m., the neighborhood had assembled. It was everyone. Greg from next door, who always borrowed my hedge trimmer, the Millers, who I'd feuded with about their recycling bin. Brenda had gotten to them. The entire street was there, gathered on the sidewalk and my lawn, a nervous, chattering semicircle of suburban judgment. Brenda stood at the foot of my driveway like a general addressing her troops. She had a clipboard and a portable megaphone. This was it. "Thank you all for coming," she barked into the megaphone, which screeched with feedback. "We are here tonight because our community is under attack. An attack of defiance, of mockery, and of insects." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "For weeks," she continued, "I have tried to be reasonable." A few people coughed. "I have tried to enforce the bylaws that we all agreed to, bylaws that protect our peace, our safety, and our property values." She gestured wildly at the magnificent sunflower behind her. This monstrosity is a clear violation, and the animal it houses is vicious and unpredictable." Greg, my neighbor, raised his hand. "Brenda, I'm not sure vicious is the right word. My kid fed him a whole hot dog yesterday. He just gummed it." "He's luring you into a false sense of security," Brenda shrieked. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This circus." She was working herself into a frenzy. This was her big moment. "I am formally moving," she announced, "that the HOA levy the maximum possible fine against Mr. Johnson until this thing is removed, and that we petition animal control to have the animal evaluated." The crowd murmured. This was getting serious. Animal control. I looked at Barnaby, who was inside, his nose pressed against the living room window, watching the proceedings. He let out a sad little whimper. That was it. My fear vanished, replaced by a cold, clear rage. Animal control. "Brenda," I said, stepping off my porch. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmuring. She turned, surprised. "This is my meeting, Mr. Johnson." "It's my lawn, Brenda, and you're not calling animal control." "I am! I will! That dog is a menace! Do something! Stop him!" she screamed, her voice cracking, pointing at my front door. I smiled. "Okay." I turned to the crowd. "My apologies, neighbors. I know this has been weird, but Brenda wanted me to remedy my aggressive dog, and I did. You just haven't seen the main event." I pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from my pocket. I'd set it up earlier. I pressed play. Suddenly, the air was filled with the frantic, buzzing orchestral chaos of Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee. Every head turned. I opened my front door. "Barnaby, on stage!" The music swelled, and out he waddled. Barnaby, in all his glory. The antennae bobbed, the wings fluttered. He waddled with a grim sense of purpose, his jowls flapping in time with the music. He scrambled up his little ramp, got to the center of his sunflower stage, and stood there, a 90-pound fuzzy beacon of defiance. The entire neighborhood was silent, watching this surreal performance. Brenda was apoplectic. This is what I'm talking about. It's a mockery. It's aggressive. You're right, Brenda, I called out. He looks pretty aggressive up there. He looks furious. I demand you stop this, stop him, stop this aggression now, she screamed, her voice breaking on the last word. I looked up at Barnaby. He looked down at me. I took a deep breath. I gave the final command, the one we had practiced for this very moment. My voice boomed across the lawn over the frantic classical music. Barnaby, Karen, alert! Maximum Karen! Brenda froze. What did you— Barnaby, hearing the code red command, did not just flop. He performed. He looked Karen dead in the eyes. He sucked in a giant breath. He pointed his striped velvet snout at the sky, and he let out the single, most heroic, most mournful, most earth-shattering "Arrow" of his entire life. The sound echoed off the houses. The music hit a crescendo, and then, for all the neighborhood to see, he rolled over. It was a masterpiece of physics. A 90-pound object in motion. He flopped onto his back with such force that the entire sunflower platform wobbled. His legs went straight into the air. His head lolled to the side. His tongue flopped out. He was the picture of a creature utterly, completely, and totally remedied, defeated by the sheer aggression of her voice. He just lay there, a 90-pound striped emblem of total, unconditional surrender. Flight of the Bumblebee ended. Silence. The entire street, my neighbors, the board, Brenda, stared at the vicious bee, belly up, tongue out on his sunflower, not moving a muscle. Then I heard it. Greg, my neighbor. He started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate clap. Clap, clap, clap. Then Mrs. Miller, who Brenda had tried to turn against me, let out a snort. It turned into a giggle, then a full-blown laugh. And then the dam broke. The entire neighborhood erupted. It wasn't just laughing, it was howling. People were doubled over. Ted, the treasurer, was leaning against a mailbox, crying with laughter. Sal and Frank's crew, who had coincidentally been parked down the street, were whistling and cheering. Brenda stood alone in the center of my lawn, surrounded by a sea of people pointing and laughing. Not at her, precisely, but at the sheer, overwhelming, perfect stupidity of the situation she had created. She was bright red. She looked at the laughing crowd. She looked at the dead bee on the sunflower. She looked at me, standing on my porch, smiling. She didn't say a word. She dropped her megaphone, which hit the grass with a dull thump. She spun on her heel. And she didn't just walk. She fled, pushing through the laughing neighbors, back to the beige sanctuary of her home. The door slammed. The show was over. The aftermath was glorious. The emergency meeting immediately devolved into the best block party we'd had in years. Greg ran to get a case of beer. The Millers ordered pizza. Barnaby, having been resurrected with bacon, was brought down from his sunflower to receive the hero's welcome he deserved. He was smothered in head pats and pepperoni crusts. The HOA quietly, and I mean silently, dropped all complaints. Bylaw 7, Section 4 was never mentioned again. Barnaby became a legend. The Barnaby, as he was now officially known, was a neighborhood landmark. People would drive by slowly, their kids waving out the window. "Look, honey, it's the bee-dog." The local news, in a slow week, even ran a 30-second kicker story at the end of the 6 unquote broadcast, calling him the neighborhood beset hound, a symbol of community spirit. Brenda was gone. Not gone, but gone. She stopped her patrols. She stopped coming to meetings. Her blinds remained perpetually drawn. About a week later, Frank the contractor stopped by. He had a big grin on his face. "Saw you on the news, kid," he said, handing me a business card. "That was brilliant. Pure genius." "I couldn't have done it without you, Frank." "Yeah, well, you've started a trend." He pointed down the street. "Your other neighbor, Mrs. Gable, the one with the hyperactive schnauzer, she just called me." "Oh yeah? What for?" "She wants a ladybug for her schnauzer, on a giant leaf. And Ted, the treasurer, he's thinking, a lobster for his corgi." "Oh my God," I laughed. "What have I done?" "You're a visionary, Mark," Frank said, slapping me on the back. "A fuzzy striped visionary." That night I was on my porch, drinking a well-deserved beer. The giant sunflower stood proudly in the yard, a monument to the glorious absurdity of it all. Barnaby, now costume-free, was snoring at my feet, his jowls quivering. It was quiet, peaceful even. Then a new sound cut through the evening air, the unmistakable thwack, thwack, thwack of a hammer. Across the street, a real estate agent was pounding a "for sale" sign into Brenda's immaculate beige lawn. I looked down at my dog. He opened one sleepy, bloodshot eye. I raised my bottle in a toast. "Who's a good bee?" I whispered. "Who's a good aggressive bee?" "You are, buddy. Yes, you are." Barnaby let out a sleepy, happy woof, sighed, and with a lazy groan rolled over onto his back.